Hey all, welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I'm Darren, I'm your host. Today we have a guest that's been on before, Mr. Lloyd Cupiccia, and we're going to answer some questions that we get all the time about sous vide. Since it's the holiday season, we always have new sous vide owners coming on, some of the Facebook groups, so we're going to answer some of these questions that come up all the time. But first, we're going to go into a deep dive on what sous vide actually is. So I'll be right back with Mr. Lloyd Cupiccia, the Kosher Dosher.
Smoking, grilling, getting hot and hotter, sous vide and chilling from fire and water.
Welcome back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I'm Darren, I'm your host, and today we welcome back a guest that has been on before, Mr. Lloyd Cupiccia. He is the writer of the Kosher Dosher blog, and he's been doing sous vide for a long time. He's a moderator and part of many different sous vide groups on Facebook, and he's been doing this for a long time. Welcome back, Lloyd. It's great to have you.
Hey, Darren, thanks for having me on your show. Really appreciate that. And like you said, I'm the Kosher Dosher guy and been doing this a really long time.
And today we're going to answer some questions, but first I want to do this time of year, it's the holiday season. People get sous vide units for, Christmas and other holiday gifts. And some of them never even seen sous vide or heard about it before. So I kind of want to do a deep dive into sous vide, but not too deep, kind of an overhead view where they can kind of understand some of the terminologies that we talk about in the Facebook groups a lot, and just so they can get their heads around some of the concepts that are involved in sous vide. And one of them is, I think we've talked about before, is that sous vide is not just a gadget like a Instapot or a George Foreman grill. It's an actual complete cooking method, like boiling or braising or deep frying. But it's got much more that you can do with it. So that's one of the things I want to talk about first. So let's discuss that a little bit, Lloyd.
Sure, it'd be great.
So let's talk about actual sous vide, the method, instead of just the sous vide, the circulator.
Oh, okay, great. Well, as we all know, sous vide, and for the newbies out there, it's a precision way to cook. Very, very precise. Circulating water bath at precise temperatures. You can't overcook your food. Of course, there's some parameters in between that will, you can overcook your food eventually.
Yeah, definitely can overcook your food. But one of the things that I think people, they kind of, when they look at sous vide, they think of it as a gadget. And I try to, in my Facebook group and a lot of the ones on there, people try to show people they can do more than just make a couple steaks or chicken breast.
Oh, absolutely.
And then that it's it can do so much more than just cook a protein. Even you can cook vegetables, you can cook
absolutely.
Potatoes and everything with it.
I would say that it's not a gadget. It's a cooking tool. It's another method of cooking. No different whether it's your oven, your barbecue, your steamer, your rice maker. It's a cooking method.
Right. And one of the things I want people to understand, it's not just for a protein. I mean, and it's not just for cooking a protein, a perfect steak, medium rare, where you can't overcook it. I mean, we do a lot in the group, and you do as well, experimenting. And one of the things that I like to experiment with is using sous vide to do things you can't do with any other cooking method, like making a brisket that you would normally have to cook to 200 degrees internal temp or higher, and make it more well done, to make it where you could actually eat it, or chuck roast, and that's one of the things that I think people, once they start playing around with sous vide, that's the thing that really gets their attention.
Well, you touched on something other than protein. So for example, corn on the cob, right? Most people undercook corn on the cob, but with sous vide, it transforms it into something else. I've played around with the times and temperatures, and I personally like 180 degrees for about 4 to 6 hours. It produces perfect corn. It actually digests in your system. It brings out the sweetness. You can grill it on the barbecue hours later. Corn on the cob in a sous vide is spectacular. It's It's amazing.
Well, and I love doing mashed potatoes, or even I do, new potatoes
Oh yeah,
and because of the fact you're not having to cook it in a boiling water, where the boiling water, extracts a lot of flavor from the
right.
potato. That water you're pouring out of it, down the sink, is
All
you're
the
pouring out,
starch it
yeah,
extracts.
all the starch and all the flavor
Mhm.
from the potatoes. So
Oh, exactly.
I like to make the potatoes. Now you do got to cook it a little hotter, and that's one of the things people don't understand, that different types of, vegetables have different cooking temperatures on a protein because they're different cell structures. So one of the things people, and I even talked about this in another podcast I did today, or,
Yeah.
with somebody that, that when they first tried cooking their steak, they had potatoes in with the steak. They had it at
Oh, interesting.
131. So when they took the steak out, the steak was good, and they seared it, and it came out perfect. But they tried to cook take a
Oh,
bite of the potato, and
it's
it was
hard.
rock solid,
Yeah.
because the vegetables and potatoes are different cell structures. They have
Yes.
different temps you have to cook them to get them done. So
And for your listeners, for vegetables, optimum temperatures for the cells to break down is between 186 and 194. Obviously, at 194, shorter times 186. And by the way, I was mistaken on the corn. 186 is a great temperature. So 186 to 194 is kind of the temps you want to stick with for vegetables, corn, potatoes, and stuff like that.
exactly, and that's one of the reasons I tell people that you should have, if you want to cook your whole meal sous vide, you really need to have more than one circulator, or you need to cook your protein beforehand, chill it, then put it in the refrigerator, then cook your hotter stuff like your vegetables, and then when your vegetables are almost done, you pull that meat out of the refrigerator and then sear it up,
You
and
know,
then
one of the things that I've done is I've done whole meals where I've done, carrots, potatoes, protein, and several other things. And I've done them over a course of 3 days. Time for dinner, I throw everything back in the water just to retherm at an appropriate temperature. Pull everything out of the water, I have dinner.
yeah, that's great as well. And that's a lot of people, when they ask about doing those, you know, pre-making their meals, for the week, that's a
Mhm.
really great way to do it. It's like, yeah, you take your Saturday and then you make all your meat, then you make all your vegetables, and you make all your, your starches, and then put them all in the same bag and then retherm them.
Oh, it's
You
awesome.
cook them all separately, but then, you're bagging them up, for later on in the week. And then when you're ready to eat them, you just retherm it. And like you said, then if you want to sear your steak or your chicken breast or what have you, it takes
Right.
2 seconds to do that.
And you can extend its shelf life as long as the food's been pasteurized in the bag. The bag hasn't been broken. You can extend its shelf life in the refrigerator.
Yeah. And that's the kind of things that I think people need to understand that they can do with sous vide as a cooking method. One of the things I want to talk about is what sous vide can do and what it can't do. And one of the things it can't do is get that perfect sear on a steak, or
The
that
Maillard reaction.
the Maillard reaction, where
Maillard,
it's
yeah.
the caramelization and stuff like that. But it really, to me, it doesn't need to, because it's so easy to get that, uh, quickly, that it really doesn't take long to get that crust on that steak, or
No.
your rust, or your roast. So,
Right.
and that's one of the things we're going to address in the Q&A session here, is that the different ways you can accomplish that. So I don't want to bang on that too much right now, but one of the things that can do, or a lot of things that it can do, are, like we said, it can make that, your food cooked to a perfect temperature. Like with vegetables, it can make your green beans nice and crisp.
Oh, yes.
I mean, and it's so much easier to hit that perfect temp when you're using the sous vide than trying to do it while you're steaming, or boiling, because the temperatures are going so fast. The temperature of the food itself is rising so fast. And I think, I was talking to Meathead Goldwyn about this during our podcast, and
Yeah.
he kind of brought up an analogy of a freight train, going at 100
Oh,
miles an hour, and you trying to jump off at the station and go right into the door of the station. But it's almost impossible to do that, because you are, the train's moving so fast. By the time you jump out, you're still moving.
that's a
and
great analogy. That's a great
Yeah,
analogy.
because that's what usually ends up happening, and then it's, you have to rest your steak. You cook it to a lot lower temperature that when you're actually looking for, because it's still cooking when you take it off.
The carryover temperature, right? Which we
Yeah,
don't get in sous vide, which is awesome.
yeah. So that's one of the things that I really love about it, and being able to get your green beans to that perfect level between just firm enough to get that, still have that snap where they're not raw and
Well,
not soggy.
with green beans, you have to basically shock them in ice water to stop the cooking. With
Exactly.
sous vide, you don't have to do that.
Right. Exactly. And like I said before, potatoes, you can get them to that perfect tenderness that you want,
Hmm.
and not overly done, and not underly done. You can get them, once you play around with it to figure out what you like and get that personal preference, you can make them the same every single time and not
And,
have to worry about it. Yeah.
and let's not forget, sous vide is very forgiving. So whether you do it for an hour or 2 hours, you won't be able to tell. You have a lot of flexibility.
Well, I mean, that's true to an extent. When you're cooking some of these, tougher meats, you do got to get
Yep.
some time in there. But you can, the difference between 22 hours and 28 hours is not that much when
Not
you're
for a
doing.
long cook. Not for a
Yeah,
long cook.
yeah. I mean, because I get that all the time. People will ask, well, I only got 24 hours. I can't do the 36. Well, you can still do it. It's just not going to be as tender as if you went longer. But
Well, people get concerned about going over 2 hours. They put let's say a steak in, right, and they want to cook it for 4 hours, but they don't get home till 5 p.m. It's in the bath for 5 hours. So you're not gonna be able to tell the difference. An hour is not going to do anything to the steak. Is going
yeah.
to prevent it from tasting good.
Right. Where on the other side of that, though, if you don't have it in there long enough, it could affect it pretty well.
Oh, oh, true. I won't say who it is. It's a relative of mine bought the jewel, and she used the app to cook a steak, and all I had in there was steak. And she bought a 2.5-inch ribeye. Okay, and she likes it rare, so she cooked it at 129 for 2 hours, and it came out red, unedible. She goes, "What I do wrong?" I said to use that app, you know, and the app is only okay for some things. It's not good for everything, specifically proteins.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of the people that own the Jewel love the Jewel app, but I've used the app without the Jewel itself, and their times and temps are off on a lot of things in there.
Many,
I've found, and that too. Talking about times and temps, even with Jason Logston's over at Amazing Food Made Easy,
yeah.
I like his guide because he has a range of stuff. It's not just you know cook it to here's the time and here's the temp and that's it's more of a range. There's a
It's
range.
also it's very subjective. What you
Yeah,
personally like. And Jason's right because eventually you have to dial in what works for you. You have this range. You do it 3 or 4 times. You decide for yourself what you like and what you don't like.
yeah, and you do that on everything you cook. And, I tell people all the time that when I first started doing ribeyes, I did them at 131,
Hmm.
for 2.5 hours, and then I kind of started playing around with it to see if something else I did maybe come out better. And now I do 134 for like 3 hours, because I feel I'm still getting the doneness I want, but
Right.
the fat and the collagen are getting rendered just a little bit more. It makes
Right.
it a little more juicy for me.
I wrote an article on cooking ribeye specifically, and I wrote a whole long article about cooking high fat proteins. And I personally like 133 to 135 based on the quality of the ribeye. If the ribeye is choice cut and it seems to visual inspection seems to be not the best, I might cook it at 135 for maybe an hour or two beyond what I would normally do. Where if you have a high quality piece of meat, I've had a lot of prime before, where I might choose 133 for less time because it is such a perfect steak.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I love about this cooking method. You can play around with times and temps within 2, 3, 4 degrees. You can get a totally different product, or
Absolutely.
the time and the temp combine. Moving those needles a little bit here, a little bit there, to see what you actually go. Wow, this is phenomenal. And I try to tell people that when they ask, they get on there and go, hey, what's the time and temp for a steak or whatever? You go,
What do you
well,
like?
what do you like? And I always tell them, you need to play around with it because I might like it that way. But then again, you might not. You might do what I tell you and go, well, that didn't really come out
Yeah.
the best.
So for me, I've dialed in a time and a temp for almost every protein, whether it's a flat iron steak, a flank steak, a ribeye, a New York, a filet. Everyone has their own time and their own temperature. So I've dialed in ribs, everything, brisket. I have a time and temperature for everything.
And I think it's important for people to know that going in because I've seen people really, they do one or two cooks in sous vide and just go, it doesn't come out good. This method stinks. You guys are all full of baloney. I'd rather just cook it reverse sear on the grill or, do it the way I've been doing it forever. People don't understand that you could just adjust the time and temp a little bit each way and come out with totally different, totally different product. And I really, I've had people, do that. People I know that just like, well, I tried, sous vide a couple times, and it just, I sous vide a brisket once, and it didn't come out great, And it's a lot of these barbecue guys, that they'll try it once, they'll try to do it the way they want to do it instead of the way they should do it, and then they'll tell you it stinks, and then they'll say, well, you guys are wrong. I'm going to walk away and go back over here and play with these guys. And it's like, that's fine.
Yeah, they've made no effort to learn something new.
And a lot of times they're just doing it to try to prove you wrong. They're doing it.
That's true.
They go in with the wrong attitude of, I'm going to try to experiment and see if I can make what I've been doing a little bit better. They're just, well, I've been doing it this way. I want to prove that what you're doing is wrong and what I'm doing is right. So.
Agreed.
All right. So let's see. Let's talk about the danger zone just a little bit because that's one of the things that comes up a lot with people that are new to sous vide cooking because they've always heard, about the danger zone. The food doesn't want, you shouldn't have the food in between 100 or between 40 degrees and 140 degrees for too long because you'll die. So let's talk about the danger zone. Give me a little bit of history what the danger zone is.
Well, it's something I've been studying for a while now. It started in the 50s, although it wasn't called the danger zone. And for the last, 50 plus years, 60 years, that terminology has changed from danger zone to hazard level. Even the times have changed as far as 4 hours, 6 hours. It used to be a 41 to 145. Then it changed from 40 to 140 over time. But really, it's a misleading, oversimplified food standard that was created by the government, and the 40 to 140 is this huge margin of error for the average person. If they follow the government's mandate, basically for restaurants and food distributors and food manufacturers, they will be safe. But it really is a oversimplification of what it really, really is, because not all foods are dangerous at certain temperatures. Now, I like kind of stick with as it pertains to sous vide, though. I don't want to get too far into the weeds, but basically, it's very misleading because think about this. You can actually pasteurize a protein at 128 degrees, but how can you do that if it's within the danger zone? It has to do with pathogen proliferation, okay? If you stick to certain timetables, right, it doesn't pose a risk to anyone. And as far as how it applies to sous vide, there are two things to consider: the food coming up to temperature and the food coming down to refrigerator temps. I found from all the reading I've done, the risk really is not in sous vide processed food. It's when you shock it in ice water. Because most people set their bath at a temperature, food comes up at a relative time. It's when they put the food in the ice bath where it starts to drop the temperature. They do it over an extended period of time because they don't have that much ice. That's where it really poses a risk. Because most pathogens will grow between, I think, in a very prolific state, between like 107 and about 117. Somewhere right in between there. That's when there's a lot of pathogen growth rate. Well, on the way up from sous vide, you don't have to really worry about that because You set it at, let's say, 128, 131, 133. It goes right through that range pretty fast. But when you create that ice bath and you put your food in there, it comes down awfully slow unless you actually use a lot of ice and half water. And I can give you some base times to be concerned about it if you're interested in that. So.
Yeah, I think maybe we can do that. We can go into down the road in another podcast episode. I think that's something
Okay.
we could talk about in detail. Especially some of the experiments I've seen you've been doing here lately. I think maybe next year, beginning of next year, we can take a whole episode and talk about some of that.
Let me give your viewers, well, not your viewers, but the people that are listening to the podcast, some basic stuff, basically. So it comes down to the diameter of the food. If you have a 1-inch steak, it's going to take X, Y, Z to come to temperature. If you have a 2-inch steak, it's going to take 4 times as long. So you have to worry about basically how big is your food. Okay. So if you have a 1-inch steak that is, let's say, a strip steak, 1-inch steak that's, it's a strip steak. It may take, 2 hours to come to temperature. But let's say you have another steak that's 3 inches thick and 4.5 inches wide. It's going to take a very long time to come to temperature. So I would suggest everybody use Baldwin's tables. Although they're exaggerated just a little bit, they produce quality food and safe food. But I use probes when I sous vide my food, so I've kind of got everything dialed in. But don't worry too much about the danger zone between 40 and 140. Be concerned about cooking your food safely, and I would stick with Baldwin's tables personally.
Yeah, I'm going to link the link to Baldwin's website down in the description below for people who are interested in that. And the pasteurization tables are really
they're optional. They're really optional. I mean, there's no law that says you have to pasteurize your food. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, and everything I cook is pasteurized, but there's no law that says you have to do that.
Well, but at least it explains how sous vide works. And that's kind of what, when people ask me, well, how can I know that? Well, if you look at those tables, yeah, there's a lot to look into there.
Yes.
But the general overall, what he's trying to say is, if you take your meat to this certain temperature at this long of a time, it's going to kill these pathogens. And it is more, you do get people all the time. Well, I got a 10-pound this, how long? And it's like, well, it doesn't go by pounds. It goes by, like you said, the thickness, diameter, because the heat's coming from the outside. And since you're dealing with a lower heat than you would normally in an oven or a smoker, it's taken longer for that heat to get to the center of your roast or your steak or whatever it is. So
I'm sorry, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, you go ahead.
One thing I want to touch on is one of the mistakes, or the common mistakes that I see come up in the food groups, specifically sous vide, time to temperature. And I'll see someone post, I have a 2.5-inch steak, I'm going to cook it 2 hours. Well, what they don't realize, yes, it's not harmful, it's not a big deal, but those 2.5 hours will not allow that steak to come to temperature. You're actually undercooking it. I'm not saying it's unsafe to eat. I'm just saying that it never reached 131 degrees to the core because you didn't cook it long enough. So Baldwin's tables in regards to time to temperature is important. I'm not saying that you got to pasteurize it, but you got to at least get the core to the proper temperature you want. And that takes time.
Exactly, because it's not going to be medium rare, if you don't allow the time for it to cook to medium rare, So yeah, I mean, I've seen people do that all the time, and sometimes, and it's odd because there are all types of guides and reference material out there. People will ask all the time in the Facebook, time and temp, but some of them will just make up their own, and come back and go, what I do wrong.
Let me give you an example. This happened last night. A young lady in a food group posted this recipe from Serious Eats, and it had to do with general turkey breast. And the article said, cook a turkey breast at 145 degree temperature water for about 2.5 hours. Okay. And she asked if that was adequate. And last night, I was doing my own turkey breast, and I was using probes. Well, that really is based on the diameter, the thickness of the protein. And I told her I had a 65 millimeter turkey breast, which is a little over 2 inches. And at the 2 hour mark, I was only at 136 degrees. I cooked that about 6 hours though. But that's where I think Jason Lundstrom had it right, where you kind of give a range of temperatures. Serious Eats should have, gave that variable that if it's between this thickness and that thickness, you have to go this XYZ time. But 2.5 hours was really, really misleading. I mean, she could have produced something that was, not only was it not pasteurized, but the center, the core never reached 145 degrees.
Yeah, it could be actually dangerous.
It could be very dangerous.
Yeah, especially on poultry. Yeah, but yeah, I kind of I agree with you on that. Because and you get this too. People ask all the time. Cooking from frozen compared to cooking from thawed. I mean, does it make a difference? Of course, it makes a difference because if I'm going to cook something, I go by a guide that says cook it at 131 for 2 hours.
Right.
That is assuming that it's thawed. So you can't just say, well, I'll just add another 15 minutes because it takes so much longer, like you said, for that meat to get to the thawed level,
There's nothing wrong with it. It's just not as precise. If you've dialed in time and temperatures for your proteins, and now you're dealing with something frozen, it's kind of a guess. It's really what it is. It's a guess.
Yeah. Now I tell them if you're cooking something for like 24 to 48 hours, it really doesn't matter too much.
It's irrelevant.
Yeah, but if it's something where it's a steak and you're throwing a steak in and you're just adding 10 minutes, well, that 10 minutes, you don't, at 131 degrees, you don't know that that's thawed all the way.
So I've done it before. So I know you're going to touch on a little bit about frozen and seasoning, but I give you some examples where I have gone from frozen, but like you said, they were done on long cooks. And I'll touch on that in a second.
Sure. Yeah, we'll get that in the second part as well.
Okay.
So that's another thing, one of the things I want to touch on just as an overview. People always ask the newbies, why does sous vide take so long? I can't imagine cooking, for this long of a period of time, to cook something for, 5 hours that would normally cook in 10 minutes, So why does sous vide take so long, Lloyd?
Why does it take so long? Well, let's talk about gradient cooking. So if you have let's talk simple, a steak, right? Well, the average frying pan, if you're going to cook in a frying pan, it's at 450 degrees. You put your steak in there, the outside, all the moisture gets evaporated. The Maillard starts to happen, starts browning. And by the time the inside gets cooked, right, let's say you like 131 degrees, it's pink, outside is gray, right? Well, with sous vide, right, it takes a very long time because you're trying to avoid that gradient cooking. You're cooking at a very, very precise temperature. So versus the frying pan is at 450 degrees. So you can imagine the outer layers, hitting right away, 212, working its way down to the center at 131 degrees. In 5 minutes, you have a steak that's not only overcooked, but barely any pink in the middle. With sous vide cooking, you're at 131 degrees from start to finish. So the outside is 131 degrees. By the time it works its way into the center of the meat, it could take 3 to 5 hours. But you don't have the gradient table. In other words, you don't have any grays. You have no browns, no blacks. It's one temperature through and through. It just takes time. That's all.
Yeah, and it's kind of like when I was talking about Meathead and his analogy of the fast-moving train.
Yes.
If you want precision, you want to be able to walk off the train and walk right into the door of the station.
Yep.
It's pretty much got to be stopped or going really, really, really slow. So
exactly.
So the slower the train's going, the more chance do you have to be able to walk right off the train and go to a straight line into the door of the station. So
exactly.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that people, they just don't get their heads wrapped around at first. But then when you start explaining to them, and then when they start seeing things that they can actually do. Like I said, to me, it was the brisket, where I could make it medium rare, or the chuck roast that you can cook medium rare and actually be able to eat it, as taste like a ribeye steak because it's so tender.
A game changer.
Yeah.
Sous vide is a game changer. People have a hard time. A lot of people don't like turkey breast or poultry breast because they always overcook it. With sous vide, you don't have to worry about that.
Right. Yeah, and it's one of my my wife's favorite things is top round. Because that normally you can't. If you try to cook that like a steak, you won't be able to chew it. You got to cut it.
No,
You got to cut it
no.
really, really, really thin. So that you can barely, still can barely chew it. But if you cook that, for 36, 48 hours at 131 degrees, it's not the most juicy, thing because there's not a lot of fat on it or, to make it that way. But it's a lot better, and it's one of my wife's favorite things because she's not a big, fat, on her steak person. So she tells me, man, I'll have that all day long,
Wow, nice. It's a great roast beef. I'll use top round for roast beef sandwiches.
But yeah, it's what sous vide can do with some of these tougher and cheaper cuts. It just expands your menu a lot more.
It does.
You don't need to go out and buy a fillet, tenderloin if you want a nice tender steak anymore. You can go get something that would normally be a little tougher and cook it sous vide, and you couldn't tell a difference, or you could make it something that's very similar that you go, man, that's knocking people's socks off that they couldn't.
Not to mention more flavor, because if you can take a New York steak, for example, and make it as tender as a fillet, not only you have something flavorful, but also something that's very tender.
Exactly. All right, Lloyd. Well, I think we covered a lot there in the first part, so I think we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to answer some questions that I've gotten from some of the groups, and some that I've gotten recently, and some that come up a lot, and we're going to kind of address those. So
Sounds great.
I'll be right back with Lloyd Cupiccia. Hey, y'all, it's Darren, and today I want to talk about the Inkbird Wi-Fi Rainproof 4 Pro barbecue thermometer that's brand new. The IBB-Q4T has a rechargeable battery that can last up to 26 hours once it's fully charged, and you can monitor it from pretty much anywhere with the 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi that it uses. It comes with the brand new Inkbird Pro app that you can monitor your meat and the temperature of the grill from pretty much anywhere, from your house, anywhere in the house, from your office, from the store, driving down the street. Inkbird makes some really awesome barbecue products, and this one is no exception. Check it out below with the link to Amazon. You can use the code that's listed for $30 off, making it only $70. Check out Inkbird and all their products. Now back to the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. All right, we're back with Lloyd, and we're going to talk. We're going to answer some questions that come up a lot in the Facebook groups and stuff I get through emails. And I know that Lloyd sees a lot of these questions, and we're going to address these as we see fit here. Not going to get to every single question that could ever come up with sous vide, but we're going to do a lot of them that the general ones that seem to come up a lot. So one of the first ones that comes up, and I know we see this all the time, is thoughts on seasoning your protein before or after your sous vide cook. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, that's really interesting. So personally, I like to season, but again, it's personal and subjective. It's what you like. I've had some great. Let's talk science real quick. You season your meat. I'm assuming salt. Salt truly is the only thing that will penetrate the meat over time. The other stuff is the surface. Your surface treating the meat doesn't do much, except it is a surface treatment, and I love it. Tastes fantastic. I love seasoning meat before I sous vide. Specifically, the salt makes its way into the meat, and you give it enough time, it gets right into the center. So salt at precise measurements adds to the protein. Flavor, it's amazing. I love it. Do it all the time.
Yeah, and I think, like you said, it's a personal preference.
It is.
I never knock anybody who doesn't, but they can't convince me there's a reason not to, because like you said, any other cooking method out there, you season your meat before you cook it. And even though it's just salt's the only thing that will penetrate deep into the meat, the other stuff will coat the surface, even during the sous vide, even though it's going to be, purging some liquid and, getting into the, taking some of it off the surface. It's still getting into the liquid, and that liquid is still coating the meat.
Absolutely. But in addition to that, though, if your personal preference is you like the surface treatment, right, then heck, it's how it tastes and it's how it smells. If you like it, do it. Um, I've done it both ways. I've run experiments where I've had 8 steaks. I've done them all differently. One was just plain in the bag. One was with salt. One was with this type of seasoning. One was marinated. One was actually punctured with the seasoning forced into the meat. And no one liked the unseasoned steak. I'm not putting that down. I'm just saying that no one liked it. It comes down to personal preference. It really does in the end.
Yeah. And like I said, I always tell people that I'm not going to, tell, and I do this with everything. It's just like the time and temp thing or the donenesses, everything's going to boil down to personal preference,
Right.
So this is one of them. I mean, if you don't want to season your meat before you throw it in the sous
Who
vide, then
cares?
don't. But
Well,
but don't tell somebody they're doing it wrong because they do.
Exactly. And I found it's like someone telling me, "Oh, I can't believe you eating that red steak. I don't like it that way." Well, good for you. I like my steak rare.
Right.
We don't care.
I won't eat your food if you don't eat my food, okay?
Exactly. Although I bet my food tastes better. I'm not going to sound. I'm a little arrogant, but my food's going to taste better anyway.
Right. So that's one thing that, like I said, it's going to boil down to personal preference, but there's nothing wrong with either way.
No, not at all.
If you want the salt to penetrate the meat, especially if you're going to, get that brining effect, because
yes,
I know you're big on, Amazing Ribs. They have some of the articles on there, and
amazing, fascinating articles. I love Meathead.
And one of the articles gets passed around is that one on marinades and
Yep.
all that. But there's another article that people kind of don't really see about brining. And then one of the things in that brining article is that if you add salt to meat and you apply the brine to heat, it actually speeds up the brining process.
Oh, you read my mind. Yeah, the Dr. Blonder
Right.
wrote an article on that. I read that. Yes, as it cooks, the salt starts to diffuse and work its way into the meat. So even if you only dry brine for 6 hours, it's mostly on the surface. As the protein cooks, sous vide, it slowly makes its way into the center of the meat.
Exactly, and it speeds it up. I mean,
It does.
eventually, if you brine something for 3 or 4 days, eventually the salt will penetrate. But when you cook something sous vide, it speeds up that process
It does.
because the heat makes the salt work faster. So technically, if you put the salt in before your sous vide bath, you're actually speed brining.
And let's touch on this real quick for your viewers or your listeners. Excuse me. So when you put salt on a protein, the first thing it does is it releases some moisture. It creates a surface brine. The salt and the moisture of the meat breaks down the salt, right? And it gets reabsorbed. That's diffusion. And not only does it flavor the meat, but it actually prevents it from overcooking, holds on to more moisture while it's cooking, and denatures the protein strands. So imagine those little fibers inside the meat loosening up a little bit. Well, when we cook meat, what happens? Everything tightens up and it squeezes out moisture. Well, by adding salt to your protein, it denatures the protein strands, it loosens them up, and during the cooking process, it can't squeeze as much water out, hence making a more moist steak and much more tender.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that I think people get a little confused, especially this time of year. Everybody brines their turkey, but they think that they're adding flavor, like the onions and the garlic and
no, it's not doing
the
that.
citrus. They think that that's going to suck up into the turkey, which it doesn't.
It does
the
not.
only thing you're really doing, the brine is actually making that bird so that it holds on to more moisture when it cooks. So
it's more flavorful. More flavorful too.
Yeah, which makes it more flavorful. I mean, it's going to have that salt. That salt is the seasoning, but it's also holding on to more moisture. But all that other stuff you throw in a brine, and really, it's a surface treatment that's going to, it'll be there on the skin and maybe on the top, couple, maybe thousandths of an inch on the meat, but it doesn't get deep into it.
But Darren, that being said, if you like it, do it.
Exactly. Oh yeah, not saying that there's nothing wrong with it. Exactly, because I do that too. I do it all the time. But I don't, I know that it doesn't go deep into the meat, and that's, I don't do it.
I would tell people if they really want to get inside the meat, you have to inject.
Exactly.
And I injected my turkey as well last night with butter. I love butter. I like butter.
Yeah, I do that too. I do butter, garlic, and a little onion powder, and
see, there you go.
Little stock, and There's nothing wrong with brining and injecting, that's for sure.
Not at all.
All right, so the next question, let's go into, like we were touched on this a little bit earlier, to cook from frozen, or do you have to thaw everything out?
So it depends on what you're doing. Personal feelings, I like to defrost everything. I like it refrigerated temperatures because I've dialed in times and temperatures. On short cooks, I would not recommend it because you're guessing. On some long cooks, it's okay. So, for example, tri-tips, flat iron steaks, flank steaks, where I'm going a very long time, I will do it occasionally. For example, tri-tips. I may go to Costco and I'll buy 8 to 10 tri-tips. Break them all down. I season them the way I want to. I let them dry brine for a certain amount of time. I vacuum them and I put them in the freezer. So not only are they dry brine, they're seasoned, they're frozen. Now, when I was working, I'm retired now, I would want to cook my tri-tip for anywhere between 6 to 9 hours. But from the frozen state, it can go easily 12 hours. I dump in the water frozen. I'd go to work, come home, I got steak. So on long cooks, yes. Short cooks, no.
Yeah, and I do a mixture of both, and usually when I do the shorter cooks, I add at least an hour, like with chicken breast or pork, thin pork chops,
Mm-hmm.
like an inch. I know an hour is going to give me plenty of time, and like we said before, that hour, one way or the other, is not going to
No,
affect
not at all.
overdoneness. So it gives me that cushion to know that it's going to get thawed in time and all that too. And I like to, do like you said. I bulk purchase, meat at Costco. I'll buy a whole rib
Yeah.
sub primal, break it down myself, and then season them up and bag them up and frozen, and then I can just drop them in the water and go when I'm ready to go. So
Yes.
I think that's the most convenient way to do it, and and it works well with just about any protein you can buy in bulk like that. So
Right. It's not my practice, but gosh, it's awesome to do. You're in a rush. When I was working a lot of frozen chicken breasts that were seasoned in the freezer, dump them in the water for my wife. She gets up, she's got lunch for the kids.
yeah,
You
exactly.
know.
All right, so let's move on from that. That's a pretty basic question, but how about what do we do with the bag purge? All those juices that we have after after we're done with our sous vide cook, there's usually some liquid in that bag. What do we do with it? How do we use
Well,
it?
I make sauces. I make gravies. So what is the purge to begin with? All it is all the moisture, all the coagulants, little proteins coming out of the meat. It can be cloudy, shady. It can have seasonings if you use seasonings. And some people, they'll just put it through a sieve or some cheesecloth and just keep the seasoning. Some will actually warm it up in the microwave and stir it. And what that does, it coagulates all the proteins. And then you can strain that through cheesecloth, and then you're left with a clarified purge, the moisture in the bag. And then I add it to sauces.
Yeah, I do that too, and I had this conversation with Meathead because it's one of his big pet peeves is it's not blood. There's not
Oh
blood.
gosh, no.
It's myoglobin, and myoglobin is a protein. It's not blood. The blood
Carries
has already
oxygen.
been the blood's been drained from the animal when it's
Right.
slaughtered. So it's actually not safe to have the blood in the animal. So
Right.
when you order that medium rare steak, you're not that juice that's flowing out of it is not blood. It's myoglobin.
Right.
And
It's just moisture. The pink
Yeah.
color is the myoglobin. All it is it carries oxygen to the muscles. That's all.
Right. And
that's
like
why.
you said,
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
like you said, that's what I do. If I'm going to use it for a sauce, which I do a lot of times, sometimes I don't because my wife and kids don't use it. So I'll just go ahead and I'll let them use steak sauce. But I like to make a sauce out of it. But I usually heat it up on the stove and like you said, and then just strain off the foam that comes to the top.
Exactly.
And then you pretty much got stock. It's just like you would get your boil your bones or something. It's beef stock.
Yes, it is. It's delicious,
and it's a lot more flavorful too. So
absolutely. But I keep my purge for almost everything. I love that stuff.
Yeah, it's great stuff.
And if you seasoned your protein beforehand, now you have seasoned stock.
Yeah. But that's a big important step though, because people do, they get freaked out when they go to make a sauce out of it and it gets that stuff at the top. They just got to understand, just strain it off. It's not going to hurt you, and it's just, you don't want to keep it in there because it can make it gummy and, not, have that mouth feel. It's not really good. So, just strain the foam at the top off, and then you got perfectly seasoned stuff you can make gravy
Right.
out of, or a sauce. So
And for your listeners, again, the red color in meat is not blood.
it's not blood,
It's no different than poultry. The only
right?
reason why white meat is white is because the chickens don't get a lot of exercise. That's it.
That's right. So, yeah, the breast is the most not used muscle in the chicken.
Exactly. And that's why the legs and the thighs are a little darker, because it has a higher percentage of myoglobin. That's
Right.
it.
All right, so let's move on to using an ice bath before searing.
Oh, yeah.
All right, so this came from one of my followers, and it's kind of a general question, but
Yeah.
I know ice baths, can be used, one way or the other, for bigger roasts or when you're smoking, or for steaks. So let's just touch on ice baths overall.
Okay. Well, let's talk why we do it. So if you're sous vide processing protein and you're going to have it down the road a couple of days for dinner, 3 or 4 days a week, 2 weeks, you need to shock it to get it below a certain temperature. The USDA will say, within the first 2 hours, get it below 70 degrees, and then you can refrigerate it. It basically requires a lot of ice, a lot of water, and in regards to how does it apply to sous vide, if you want to eat right away, think of it this way. You've got a piece of protein that's been cooked to its optimum temperature. Let's say a New York strip at 128 degrees. If you take it out of the bag, dry it off, throw it into a skillet, it has nowhere to go but up. So from 128, it's going to rise in temperature. Your now perfectly cooked steak is now at 135 degrees. Shocking is a way to mitigate that. And what I mean by that is, I'm not talking about putting it in the ice bath, but maybe running it under cold water for like 2 or 3 minutes. Maybe submerging it for 2 or 3 minutes, dropping it down to, let's say, 115, 117. That way, when you put it into the skillet, right, to brown, to Maillard, it'll rise back up to 128 degrees. And it's all based on thickness, of course, and technique and your experience.
Yeah, and like I said, this comes up, but it's not like you said. It's not just one reason to use an ice bath. There's more than one. It's when I do large barbecue meats like pork butt or brisket.
Right.
I'm doing that to drop the core temperature down for pretty much the same way you would do it on that steak you just mentioned.
Yes.
So that when I do put it on the smoker, it gives me a lot more time to have that meat to develop that bark and that smoke, that flavor that we like to get. Because even though smoke is mostly going to be a surface treatment, the more moisture that you can have and the longer it can be in that smoker, and you keep applying moisture to it by spritzing it every 30 or 40 minutes,
which attracts more smoke,
and then that bark gets to be built. And if you have it iced down so that core temperature is back under 100 degrees, you got that much more time to keep it on that smoker to get back. You got plenty of wiggle room, plenty of time to develop that bark. And I think a lot of people don't understand that. That's why they try to smoke it before they sous vide it, because they think it's going to spread, it's going to be better.
Yeah, both ways work, but I'm not a fan of smoking before, because you don't develop any bark.
Right. So yeah, so that's one way to use the ice bath. The other is, like you said, if you're going to store your food for a longer period of time, to get that, you want to get that down back, through that danger zone as quick as possible, so that you're storing it. You don't have any, doesn't have any way at all to have any bacteria grow inside of it.
Let's work in reverse though, Darren. So for example, let's say you have a 1-inch steak that's coming out of the refrigerator. It was sous vide processed. It was shocked, but now it's ice cold. Do you have to retherm? Okay. Do you have to bring it up to temperature before you put it in the frying pan or skillet? Well, that's based on thickness. If it's not too thick, you can go directly from the refrigerator to the skillet or to the grill, And during the Maillard reaction, it will come up to a serving temperature. If you have something very, very thick, you may have to re-sous vide to bring up to an appropriate temperature, then grill or cook in a saute pan or something like that. For example, chicken breasts. Chicken breasts are pretty thin. Popping out of a bag, throw it in a skillet. You got chicken breast that is actually at about 125 degrees for serving temperature. But if you got something really, really thick, you're going to have to retherm that, whether sous vide or some other way, like your smoker, for example.
Right.
Your barbecue.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's keep moving. Let's go to somebody asked about resting your meat after a sous vide cook and sear. Is it necessary? Okay. If so, do you tent it? Do you cover it? What are your thoughts on that?
You don't have to do any of that stuff. The only reason why you would rest your meat is so the juices can redistribute inside the protein. Resting is always carryover temperature. If you were to do it, like say in an oven or a barbecue with sous vide, it's never going to exceed 131 degrees if that's what you had your IC set at. So resting your meat is unnecessary. Shocking, of course, is if you want to brown it, but resting, no. Tenting, I never really understood the idea of tenting unless you wanted to keep it warm. So you have a turkey that comes out of the oven, you put a tent on it. All I think that does really is increase the moisture on the surface and it makes your skin uncrispy. So I'm not a big fan of that. But resting, not with sous vide. You can go right from the sous vide, dry it off, put it in the skillet, pop it out, and eat it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people get confused. They don't know what they think resting is. It's cooling down, and then all the juices are getting redistributed. But what it really does is, like you said, it's overcooking. It's continuing to cook.
Yes, it is.
While it's sitting there, because it's like that train analogy we used earlier. That train was going 100 miles an hour. You took it off.
Yep.
Okay, it may not be going 100 miles an hour anymore, but it's still going 60 or 70, and then it's slowing down. Then it's going to 50 to 40 to 30.
Let's talk about that for your listeners. So carryover temperature. So for example, let's talk about your top round, right? So you got a roast, right? It's probably 4.5 inches, 5 inches by about 8 inches. You throw it in a 350 degree oven. You pull it out at 125 degrees, right? Nice and rare. But since it was in a 350 degree oven, you have to let it rest to do two things. If there's carryover temperature, it's going to get up to about 100, probably 129 degrees internal temperature. Because the carryover temperature, that will not happen with sous vide at all, okay? But by letting it rest, it will redistribute the juices inside, but it will continue to cook. With sous vide, you don't have to do nothing. I mean, comes out of the oven, it's at 100, out of the immersion circulator vessel, it's at 131 degrees.
Exactly. It doesn't have to redistribute because the juices are already distributed.
Very bad for you.
Yeah, exactly. All right, so let's keep moving. Now, somebody asked a question about tenderizers in combination with sous vide. So, like,
are you referring to like the stuff you sprinkle on the meat?
That or pineapple, or because I guess that comes up because I've seen like Guga at Sous Vide Everything. They've done these kind of experiments with using different tenderizers,
okay,
and then using them in conjunction with sous vide to kind of tenderize stuff. Which to me, sous vide tenderizes on its own well enough that I don't think you need anything else to help tenderize.
All that is a way to marinate, and you're not really tenderizing because, as we know, it's not going to penetrate. On the surface, it will kind of break down the proteins and kind of make it mush a little bit. So I'm not for tenderizers. I'm not.
I've actually used a marinade that had a lot of apple cider vinegar in it. When I first started sous vide cooking, it's a chicken recipe that's from upstate New York, and it uses apple cider vinegar as a marinade, and it actually turned the chicken to mush. So I avoid using any kind of seasoning or any kind of stuff in the bag that can do that, because it can have a really bad
pineapple juice is interesting because it has an enzyme in there, and they've actually in huge commercial meat tenderizers, they however they do it, they dehydrate it, they break it down, and it's actually a sprinkle they put on meat. But all it really does is it breaks down the surface of the meat and makes it kind of mushy. Now, I'm not against marinades per se, okay, but marinades usually have a lot of other flavors in it, salt, pepper, garlic, herbs, spices, and oil. Okay, good marinades don't contain a lot of the acidic stuff like pineapple juice, apple cider vinegar, lemon juice, lime juice. Otherwise, your meat's going to turn out to be mush. I'm not
Exactly.
for it. I'm not for it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. That's what I always say. If you're going to marinate something, make sure there isn't something, an acid or something in there that's going to
Mush your
make
meat.
over tenderize your meat. All right, so here's another one. This is a quick one. What's the best chamber vacuum bag to use with sous vide?
Wow.
And I don't think that's really. I think pretty much any chamber vac bag.
One that works. One that works. How's that?
Ones that work. Yeah, I mean, 3 mil is probably the most used one out there.
Yes.
If you're concerned about the bag breaking, you might want to get the 4 mil ones, the thicker ones. But I mean, the 3 mils are cheap. You can buy them in, bulk for like, 3 or 4 cents each.
Yes.
And that's what I use. No particular brand name. As long as they're food safe, they're fine.
And again, they work.
Yeah,
So
they work.
each company has their own way of making them. So you find one that's cheap, it works, stick with it.
Exactly. Okay, so what another one? Adding things to the bag, like I've seen this a lot, especially on YouTube, where they put slices of onions and whole garlic, and the springs of thyme and the fresh herbs and all that in the bag. What are your thoughts?
I have an opinion on that. All right. So back to what we said earlier about surface treatment, but let's specifically talk about onion, garlic, and fresh herbs. All you're doing is flavoring that specific spot on the protein. That's it. So that one specific spot on the protein is going to have a very pronounced flavor. Okay. Now there's a workaround if you want to do it. And I've done this and it works very, very well. And I didn't come up with it. Thomas Keller's, one of their sous chefs came up with this, and I do it with my turkeys. You can take a bunch of fresh herbs. And by the way, I'm against fresh garlic and onion, but I'll get to that in a second. Take a bunch of fresh herbs, chop them all up, and put them in a plastic sachet. For your listeners, what is a sachet? A sachet is usually used when you make stocks. It's cheesecloth. You put a bunch of stuff in it. You tie it up. You put it in your stock. A plastic sachet is just a piece of plastic wrap, right? Usually about 8 inches by 8 inches. You put your herbs in the middle, fold the bag over, pierce the bag with some type of knife, and you put that on your meat. As the meat cooks, it releases moisture, it intermingles with the herbs, and the herbs release moisture into the meat, and it perfumes your meat. It doesn't really penetrate, but it will perfume your meat. Putting it directly on the meat, right, does nothing except make that one specific spot have a very pronounced flavor. Does that make sense at all?
Yeah, exactly. It's like a
plastic sachet.
Yeah, it's a tea bag, just like the same concept of a tea bag. You're going to get the moisture will extract the flavors from the herbs, and then it seasons the purge. But yeah, exactly. I'm with you.
It'll perfume the meat. It will perfume the meat is how I call it.
Exactly. And that's why I use mostly dry seasonings. I use garlic powder, onion powder, because that's what you're doing. You're avoiding that. Okay, yeah, it does taste maybe a little bit different, but you're the benefit of getting the garlic flavor throughout the whole purge and the outside of the meat is going to be so much better.
Well, let me ask people.
Concentrated, so
a raw garlic, right, cooked at 131 degrees will remain raw, and it does not taste good.
Right, exactly.
It doesn't taste good raw. So same thing with onions. Onion powder, garlic powder works, but none of that stuff raw.
Right. Okay, we're on the same page there. All right. Cooking in the store vacuum packaging. This comes up like at least twice a day. People will say, I just bought this, these steaks, and they're already vacuum packed from the store. Should I cook in them? What do you
Wow.
think?
So I read several articles on that, and all the plastic bags that are manufactured in the United States, okay, um, is are safe. But are they safe at sous vide temperatures? I don't know. I've read yes and I've read no. But what concerns me more than that, because I know the bags are safe, is that are they punctured? I've seen people take vacuum sealed bags from the store, dump them in the water, frozen, but yet there was a little hole in the bag. I say rebag, because
Yeah.
that way you know that they haven't been punctured anywhere.
I just did a video last week on, I got some steaks from Crowd Cow, for,
Mm-hmm.
Wagyu steaks, and they're all
Oh
individually
yeah.
sealed. And then I thawed them out, and two of them, are leaking,
Yep.
fluid out of them. So even though they're still vacuum sealed, but like you said, you don't know what happened to that meat, how they handled it when it came into the
Yep.
store. They threw it into the case, when it was frozen, and they throw it all on top of each other. And how many times do you actually take a pork butt and thaw it out, and it's all, vacuumed up, but when it gets thawed out, you got a puddle in your
Oh,
refrigerator. So
a
yeah.
lot of times, and that's why I'm still not a fan of sous vide frozen food, unless I personally have vacuum sealed them myself. But I've got a lot of punctures where I've actually defrosted something in my refrigerator. And I always put it on paper towel because of the moisture collection. But I find out, oh, there's a hole in the freaking bag, and I have a puddle in my refrigerator.
Yeah. So that's,
Not
I always,
fun.
and besides that, is that if you want to, season it before you throw it in, the sous vide anyway, at least you have that opportunity. Or I
Yes,
said, worst case scenario, if you just want to, I'd say you could keep it in that bag, but just put it in another vacuum bag and seal it, because
I've done that too. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, that's, like I said, one of the things you don't want to do, especially if it's a nice, expensive steak, is throw it in there and all of a sudden
Ugh.
water got in there and it made it waterlogged.
Not to mention, now you got to clean your cooking vessel, you got to clean
Yeah.
your IC. What a pain.
Just to save that, what, 2 cents on the vacuum bag, and the
Oh, no kidding.
5 seconds it took you to vacuum seal it.
I
It
know.
doesn't. The risk and reward factor is not anywhere close. So
Agreed.
let's address the cooking in plastic, since that's kind of like a similar issue. I mean, every once in a while you get somebody that comes into the groups and goes, "Oh my God, we're gonna get cancer."
I tell them to leave the group. Oh my God, it's simple. Leave the group. You get the boot. If you start criticizing, do some research. Chef Steps has written several articles on this subject. Modern Cuisine and their books have addressed this issue. All the plastic, the proper, I can't even pronounce the word, propylene, all those plastic bags manufactured in the United States are safe for food. End of discussion. Don't like it. Don't join the group.
Yeah, I mean, I every once in a while you get some guy that, the only reason they joined the group was to do that. And,
Yes,
I'll see them in other groups.
trolls.
Exactly. And they'll post some blog post from somebody from 3 years ago that, misquoted some research, some weird research, article
Yep.
from 10 years ago. And you're like,
It's like MSG.
yeah,
Someone cooks with MSG, and you have all the vultures come out and say how it's unsafe. It's like, yeah. Thank you for your opinion. Let's move on.
exactly. All right. So then one of the last ones, let's get to this one, is because this is one of those subjective things, is what's the best searing method?
Best searing methods. Well, you're talking to a guy who's done it every way. I would tell you my least favorite way is using the torch. I will not use the torch. It takes way too long and doesn't produce flavorful food. I've done it every way, from the barbecue to the grill, to a broiler, to a frying pan. I actually really, really, really like the frying pan. Just love it, because I get that at least mine up to 700 degrees, and it
Yeah.
produces amazing Maillard reactions. You can get the crust, you can get the fat. I love that. My other way, when it's not raining outside, of course, is on my Weber. Right over the charcoals. I mean, it's amazing. The flavor.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm one of the ones that when I first started, I got through the whole hype of, the Sears all thing. And
I have it. I own it. Yeah.
I bought one, and I had to wait till they came back in stock on Amazon. Paid my $75 for this thing.
Yeah,
Had to pay the $40 to get the TS 8000 as well. Then I had to go buy some
yep,
propane
got it all.
tanks, and then I was like, really? I spent all this money for this crappy way to sear.
Yeah. If
It
I'm
took,
only doing like 2 or 3 steaks, and the weather's nice outside because I live in Seattle, it's always raining, the charcoal starter, right on top of the coals,
right.
it does a great job. It hits about 1,000 degrees. Great flavor if I can. The frying pan inside the house, is wonderful. I will say one thing for the Searzall. Ready? It makes great nachos.
Yeah, it melts cheese really well, but that's
Yes,
about
it
it.
does. And,
Yeah.
and I'll touch on this one last thing about the Searzall. If you want to pasteurize the surface of your meats, which I'll do on some larger cuts, and that's a different topic for a different day, it's great. You can pasteurize the outside and then vacuum seal.
Yeah, but I'm with you to sit there and take 10 minutes to sear a
Oh,
couple steaks or a roast. It's just your hand starts to cramp after a while, and it's now I do have I have one coming, but I tested out this the grill gun, the Sous Vide gun that this guy had put together. That's kind of based on the Harbor Freight weed burner that
yeah.
gets up to 400,000 BTU. So it's actually I've tested it. It works great. That is about the only way I would use a torch anymore. The Searzall is just pretty much like you said, it takes forever. Even the TS 8000 on its own, it just doesn't put out enough heat and BTUs to do it, like you could on a grill or a griddle or a cast iron pan. But I have so many different ways to sear now
Does your restaurant struggle with taking orders?
I
Right, right.
I don't use a torch anymore, but I
No,
will, I will, like I said, if I'm, in a hurry and I don't want to light my grill or turn on or smoke up the house, once I get that sous vide gun, I can push out, 400,000 BTUs on it and I can get a nice quick,
I'm looking forward to your review.
yeah.
It'll be
Uh,
interesting.
I did, there's a video on my YouTube channel showing the prototype, but from what I understand, the prototype is, probably about 90% of what the actual product's going to be when it gets here, and that's coming soon. So
Is it propane or is it electric?
no, it's propane. It's a propane, but it burns the gas and oil mixture makes it where it's and it pushes it out a lot hotter than you could get any other torch. So
So it might be either okay for sous vide or really, really great for nachos.
no, it's believe me, the one I used. Just check out my video on my YouTube
I
channel.
will.
Look up the grill gun, and because I tried them both out. So, but yeah,
I'll look.
it is though. Like I said, I like using my grills as well, and a cast iron skillet is probably in the middle there. But I'm in Florida, so I can grill pretty much anytime I want.
Oh, lucky you.
But and I have a big patio and a bunch of different grills I can choose from. But yeah, I mean, the Searzall was a thing I wasted $75 on, and I'll regret it. But that's okay. I mean, yeah,
Great for nachos.
you got to great for nachos, and sometimes you got to try
Yes.
things. But well, I think that's about that's a good episode here. Covered a bunch of stuff. Hopefully, people that are just now getting into sous vide can listen to this and get some ideas on what to look for and answer some of the questions that people may have out there. Anything else you want to kind of touch on before we wrap?
Well, I just want to give a couple of caveats. I am not against pasteurization. I like pasteurizing almost everything. But I just want people to understand the danger zone. It's not, do some research. It's misleading. It's very complicated. So I'm not against pasteurization, but the danger zone is overly exaggerated.
Yeah, and I think people really understand that in their day-to-day lives. They'll cook food, and leave it out on their counter for an hour before they put it away. Not thinking twice about it.
Oh, that is the most dangerous thing in the
I
world
know.
to do. Oh my gosh.
But people do it all the time, you know. They don't think about it, but they'll sit there and go, "Oh, well, that's in the danger zone," or whatever. But they'll leave their food out on the counter for hours at a time.
That's where people get really, really sick. And I'm writing an article on that specifically. Oh gosh, that's so
Yeah.
bad.
All righty, sir. Well, thanks again, Lloyd. Lloyd Cupiccia from the Kosher Dosher. I want to thank you for joining me, and we'll do something like this again.
Sounds great, Darren.
Really like touching on these topics, and especially with somebody like you who does a lot of these experiments and gets down deep into the minutia that some people don't like to do. We like to have people like you that we can come to and ask these questions for sure. So
thank you. I love this stuff. So I love it.
And I'm sure we'll do this again, a few times. So thanks again for joining me. And you can find Lloyd on pretty much any sous vide group on Facebook. I know he's in my group, Fire and Water Cooking. He's in Sous Vide Food and Fun. He's in Sous Vide Dummies, Exploring Sous Vide. You can find Lloyd anywhere, and also the Kosher Dosher blog. Do a Google search, and you'll find out. His blog has got a ton of information, not just sous vide. He does a lot of different things with meat glue and all kinds of different stuff. So check out the Kosher Dosher blog as well. Thanks for joining me, Lloyd.
Thank you, Darren, for having me on. I really appreciate it.
And thanks everybody for joining us on the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. All right, thanks again for joining us on the Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I want to thank Lloyd Cupiccia again for answering these sous vide questions. I hope you guys got a lot out of this. We'll probably do these again soon, answering some other questions. Make sure you check out Lloyd's blog, the Kosher Dosher. I'll have a link in the description below. Also, make sure you follow us on our Facebook group and page, Fire and Water Cooking. Check out the Fire and Water Cooking channel on YouTube for some great sous vide and barbecue videos. And join us again on the next Fire and Water Cooking Podcast. I'll see you on the next episode.